Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Shadow and Sun Show, and welcome back to another Friday game review. This will be the last Western game review I do until something else comes down the road. Maybe I'll get a chance to review Wretched Country or Cow Punchers, but I wasn't able to get those here in time. They'll be on the way, but it's going to have to wait probably to be honest, until next April, unless something comes up and forces my hand. But until then, I thought I would break out possibly one of the oldest pieces of my collection, a game that probably nobody here will remember. Probably fewer people than that will actually own a copy, but that is the Old West Gunfight Rules 1816 to 1900 skirmish rules. And let me just read the back for you guys. These rules can be used to fight skirmishes anywhere on the American continent from 1816 to 1899. For example, the Wars of Liberation in South America, 1816. Trailblazers against hostile Indian tribes, circa 1830s. Mexican revolutions. The newly raised 1st Dragoons protecting the immigrant wagon trains. Texans struggling for independence against the might of Mexico. Remember the Alamo, 1836 to 1840. Remember Soledad. The terrible Seminole Wars in Florida. Hillbilly family feuds. Mexican revolutions. Bank robberies, train robberies, jailbreaks, lynch mobs, saloon brawls, knife fights. U.S. cavalry against hostiles. Custer's famous Last Stand, 1876. Range wars, showdowns, cowmen versus sheepmen, homesteaders against Indians, and oh yes, Mexican revolutions. Canadian Mounties getting their man in the snowy wastes of the north, etc., etc., etc. All in glorious color, limited only by the imagination. Mind you, there isn't a single color image in this book whatsoever, but I think they're referring to the painted miniatures. This book was copyrighted in 1975 by Lou Zocchi. Accept no substitutes. Beware of frauds for conducting skirmishes in miniature of gunfights and cavalry against hostiles and many other frontier incidents. Embodying the code of the West as well as many myths created by film and story, or How to Make the Old West Live Again. By Steve Curtis, Mike Blake, and Ian Colwell. Now I'm going to read the dedication and in memoriam real quick before I get into the book, just because it's rather touching, and I think these guys who've probably long since made their way up to the happy hunting grounds. This book is dedicated to those female pioneers who struggled alongside their menfolk and without whom the West would never have been tamed, nor these rules written. In memoriam. Steve Curtis, one of the gifted and brilliant creators of these rules, passed away during the summer of 1975. He spent most of his life confined to a wheelchair because of multiple sclerosis and died before reaching 30. Steve's father has granted me permission to reprint this classic work. I'm sure Steve would want his work continued. After playing these rules, I'm sure you'll agree with me that our hobby was prematurely deprived of a very creative talent when Steve was taken from us. He will be greatly missed by all of us. Lou Zocchi, December 1975. 1975. I wasn't even 10 years old. I was 8 years old when this came out. And mind you, I picked this up a couple of decades later. And I got to play a little bit of it. It's a little complicated for us at the time. And mind you, we didn't have a lot of figs. That's one of the interesting things about this game. It was actually, for the most part, intended for 54 millimeter, almost armyman sized or styled plastic miniatures, but they do give some nods to 25 millimeter lead miniatures from minifigs and custom casts, and some of the great miniature companies that are actually in my collection, more so custom cast than minifigs, and would eventually become Heritage Miniatures, which would of course become my favorite miniature company of all time. Even to this day, I still look at my 25s with some very, very fond memories. And mind you, there's a lot of terrain tips and painting tips and all sorts of other great ideas for getting your stuff onto the tabletop, including using the wonderful Aerofix line of 1/72nd scale miniatures, which had just about everything you could possibly ever want, from wagon trains to cowboys and Indians and cavalry and all that good stuff. I haven't really looked into getting them because I know from past experience that they were just not really good at holding paint. The paint would rub off after drying with very little effort put upon the miniatures, unless they were based on rather large bases. You're pretty much looking at just better off just leaving them unpainted, and that's not really my jam. This game, while being only 94 pages, most of the rules can be summed up on these two last pages in the back. Once you know the rules, mind you, it's pretty tiny print, but everything's there. It's a D100 percentile based game, which, as you guys know, I'm kind of fond of it because it's got a wide range of numbers. It's easy to equate percentages into the real world expectations of what are my chances of doing this. I'm really not a big fan of trying to equate everything to a D6, or 2D6 or 3D6 or a D20. It's just there's not enough little granularity in there to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what your chances are when you add the minuses, the negatives, and the bonuses for things like cover and range and all that stuff. I'm just, I know it's no different than a D20, but I just prefer it because it's easier for my head to wrap around the numbers of, what are the odds of you being able to do this. But it's a phenomenally well-written, well-packed book full of historical facts. I was going over it again this morning, and every time I look at this book, I come up with, new little tidbits of information. I'm just going to keep that up there so we can get a nice, shot for everybody in the audience. The historical facts, these guys, did their homework, and of course, being that it was 1975, there was less of an inclination to church things up and make it more politically correct. You can tell by the language in the back of the book, they weren't shy about, talking the way the way that people talked back then. It was only, a short period of time between the end of this era to the 75 years ish, maybe 100 years, but people still talked and acted the way they did in the West, in our actual West. Growing up as a kid, I can remember people out here in California with the accents and the attitudes and the overall respect and admiration and appreciation for the difficulties these folks had to go through. Their lives were so much tougher and serious than they are now, obviously. Almost 50 years later from when I was a kid back then, when this book came out. It's got a nice, deep, in-depth section on the firearms, because it's mostly about, the weapons of the era. A little bit of knife and spear and bow and arrow, but against a Winchester or a good Colt, you're only going to get so much done with a bow and arrow. Sorry, Connell, but there's a reason why no army to this day uses a bow and arrow, and they prefer the M16 or the AR-15. It is fun. I've got a couple of bows in my collection, but if stuff needs doing, using a bow and arrow is more of a luxury or a sport than a matter of survival. And that's what these guys were trying to do. They were trying to survive, change the world around them, and there are so many great stories that could be told with miniature on the wargaming table in the time of the Old West. Modern war games are the closest you're going to get, but there's still that mystique that's missing from it. Just the absolute appreciation and love of the Old West is so well summarized in this small little book that I'm so happy that I have. I would really be surprised and love to have some conversations with anybody who actually has this book in their collection or who remembers playing it. I think my friend Grim he's probably the only person I know who might have this RPG. Grandma, if you've got this in your collection, I want to see it. See how beat up and ratty it is. Mine is actually in phenomenal condition. The only tiny microscopic issue is the corners, and I've done that by trying to store it in this Ziploc bag, which I need to get something better. You can see this bag, you can barely see through it, and it's a bit of a tight fit. I've got to actually bend it to get it in there. But that, I'm going to hang on to this one for the rest of my days, and I'm going to look forward to the opportunity to get to play it with the little guy this summer. He's a big fan of Westerns, which is quite a shock to me. Him and his friend, they play Red Dead, both versions, and they love the heck out of it. They're both into shooting and going out to the desert and just enjoying the fresh air, the sunshine, the cactus, the rocks, and the dust, and of course the tumbleweeds. I'm so lucky to have found this when I did, because I bet if I go right now on eBay, if anything, I'm probably gonna go and look after this video and see if I can't find another copy of this, maybe even the first or second edition, or who knows, maybe there's a fourth, fifth, or sixth edition of this. But if you just want to play an Old West miniature game, I know Monday Night Productions makes some really good miniatures and War Games Rules. I don't know if it's a leftover from the 70s like this, but they make some great minis. And I've got some Dixon, and of course I've got my Grenadier and a few other company Western miniatures, and I'm probably going to break those out before next year and get those painted up and out to show you. With all my stuff being 28 millimeter, I've started to go toward the Reaper Chronoscope line, which has a fantastic line of 25 millimeter cowboys. No Indians though, and it's a small line of minis, but they're really good. If you guys have some recommendations for minis that are on that level of quality in 28s, let me know, to go along with the stagecoach I've been working on, and the saloon and the other buildings I'll be building between now and then, to make this Western month just a little bit sharper for you guys. But until then, wish me luck, guys. I've got a lot of work ahead of me during the upcoming year to bring back the Old West as much as I can in my fantasy games, in my science fiction games, whatever it takes to keep the Old West alive. Until next time, folks, we love you guys. Don't forget to hit those buttons for me, okay? Because, we're trying to hit that big number, so I can give away a bunch more of my crap, because it's starting to pile up again, and I got a whole bunch of Kickstarters coming in the next couple of months, and don't know where I'm going to put it, so you guys are going to have to help me out. Until then, guys, happy trails.